Hey, so we're still talking about holiness with a W, mind you. And in today's reflection, which is the third in this series, I want to focus in a little more on the idea of relationship to self. It's captured, might seem a bit odd to you, relationship to self, but it's captured in the Great Commandments that Jesus speaks of, to love God, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I think there is this kind of critique amongst many thinkers, and maybe especially Christian thinkers, that our current generation, especially the younger generation perhaps, are too self-obsessed, too selfish, too self-absorbed, take too many selfies, that kind of sentiment we see a lot. And I think, maybe there's a valid critique there of, is our self-actualization, all our emphasis on self-fulfillment, just cultivating a kind of collective narcissistic tendency? There's probably something to explore there, isn't there? But I do wonder whether our attention, all of this attention we're trying to pay to the self, is actually partly, it's like a symptom, not a cause. And it's actually partly because we know and love ourselves so poorly, not that we actually know and love ourselves too much. I wonder whether, and I think about this especially in relation to Western culture, which is obviously my context more, that we are kind of untethered from our traditions, historic traditions that help us to make sense of our identity in context. We're disconnected often from depth of community where others can hold us, especially in our fragile moments, right? Especially when we're not sure who we are or what we're doing or what on earth is going on because the world is spinning and we haven't necessarily got that depth of community around us who can hold us at that time. We're told a lot. Certainly the social, cultural, political narrative is that our value is in what we produce and consume and our contribution to the GDP and what we chose for our career. So with all of that, I don't see a lot of good grounds for identity there. So it's no wonder we're going searching for that. We're going grasping for it. So there's two things I want to say about all of this in relation to the notion of loving the self in the context of Christian spirituality. The first is, I think, a healthy kind of Christian spirituality that fosters a wholeness, a holiness, is actually going to help us become more ourselves rather than less. So instead of starting with, and I think I've said this before, you're a terrible sinner, so then I can sell you God as the cure to how terrible you are. Instead, I think a healthy kind of Christian spirituality is actually going to one that's going to begin with dignity. It's going to begin with honor, respect, generosity, kindness from God to us, kindness from us toward ourselves. And that this is kind of central to this notion of being the image of God and experiencing wholeness. This is not some kind of good vibes, go with the flow, make me feel better about myself for no reason kind of spirituality. I think it's actually still deeply countercultural. I think it's easier for most of us, if we're honest, whether we're religious or not religious at all, to identify first with our problems, with our lack, with our weaknesses, with our anxieties, with our sins, if we want to use that word. I think it's easier to identify with that stuff than it is to identify with a sense of belovedness, with a sense of being able to look in the mirror and love who we see, not just what we see or not, but who we see. Now, there is this theme within the Christian tradition, and certainly within the Jesus story, of denying yourselves or needing to lose your life in order to find it. But Jesus in particular, the context here matters, right? He's making that statement in the first century Greco-Roman world where identity and who mattered was forged through status and power and exerting dominance over others. And Jesus is pushing it back against that idea. He offers instead notions of humility, of becoming like a little child, of centering the people who otherwise would be on the margins. And so he's not saying suppress who you are, deny the parts of yourselves that are actually core to your own uniqueness, right? Instead, there's this invitation, in fact, in Jesus to be able to let go of that kind of grasping for identity through power and dominance and a coming alive then to who we really are, to who we truly are. And Irenaeus, one of the early church fathers, makes this kind of statement. It's become very famous in theological circles, that the glory of God is humans fully alive. So in that sense, our spirituality is supposed to enhance, amplify, elevate a sense of who we are rather than to suppress it and deny it. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is also important that goes alongside that, which is that we don't do this by ourselves in isolation. I am not an autonomous self. Now, autonomous self is kind of an idea in the Western tradition that I am this free person who can just make my own decisions and I can determine my own choices and direct and shape my own life and I'm entirely free from all other entities. And while being an individual and having a sense of boundaries, having a sense of personal autonomy is a good thing, especially for those whose personal autonomy and freedom has been robbed from them or suppressed, right? But having said all of that, there's still a sense in which I only really figure out who I am through my connections with others. My way of making sense of my own identity. There are parts of me that only exist, that only come alive because of the connections and relationships in my life. My parents or caregivers obviously are a really obvious part of how my identity has been formed, but so is my wider community of whānau, of friends, or maybe of church community or other aspects of community. My friendships now continue to be something that brings parts of me alive that otherwise would not be alive. And so in that sense, I am only who I am because of those around me. And then add that to the layer of that is the sense of those who have gone before. In the biblical tradition, there was often the context of understanding identity through genealogy. That's certainly true in Te Ao Māori in New Zealand. This idea of whakapapa, this idea of I am who I am only in the context of my ancestors, or maybe in the context of land and ocean and river and sea, right? So this idea that I can kind of make sense of myself by myself actually brings a lot of pressure, brings a lot of anxiety. How do I figure out who I am? Who am I in the world? These kinds of questions come when we think of ourselves as having to forge our identity by ourselves. And so there's these two things that sit alongside one another here. One is spirituality should help us become more of who we are. And the second is, another aspect of spirituality is it helps us to recognize all of those connections that help to shape who we are, and that we don't have to figure it all out on our own. So, once again, I'm going to finish with a guided reflection, and as always, you can either have me guide you through it here, or you can follow the guidelines on our webpage, or extra for experts. You can do both if you like. What we're going to do today is we're going to do a brief palms down, palms up practice. And if you haven't done that before, what I'll invite you to do in a moment is to turn your palms downward as a sign, a kind of a physical symbol of letting some things go. And then having done that, I'll invite you to turn your palms upward, and that will be a sign of receptivity, of opening yourself up to receive that which you need. So that's what we're going to do. It'll just take a couple of minutes. So if you're willing to do that with me, then just take a minute to get comfortable, to find your feet on the floor, to get comfortable in your seat if you are sitting, to become aware just of your presence in this moment, and then when you're ready, to close your eyes. Unless you're listening to this while you're driving, in which case definitely do not close your eyes. Otherwise, feel free to close them. And as you do, just tune into the breath. Maybe take a few deep breaths in and out, just slowly. And you're able to feel your chest rising and falling with those breaths. Just a sense of being present to the moment, allowing yourself to slow down. You don't have to rush through this. It's only going to be 2 minutes of your life. There's no race. There's no performance required. You don't have to be the best at slowing down. You can just relax for a minute. And in that place of mindful attentiveness, maybe even attentiveness to divine presence, I want to invite you to take your hands and to turn your palms downward. You can just rest them on the tops of your thighs, of your legs if you want, or by your side, or in the air if you would like to do that. They're just facing downward as a symbol of letting some things go that need to be let go. And there might be things you have in mind that I don't know about, so you can choose to give them over in this moment. This is a chance even to give things over to God, if that makes sense for you. I don't know what's on your list of things, but I've got a couple of suggestions of things you might want to let go of if you need to. One might be, perhaps you have some harsh judgments of yourself. Maybe you have a strong inner critic, that voice inside you that keeps telling you, you're not up to it, you're not enough, you're not good enough, you failed again, you let the team down, whatever it might be. And if that inner critic resides in you, just take this moment as an opportunity to let it go. Again, as always in these reflections, maybe not forever, but just let it go for the moment. Just give it over to the divine presence that's with you. It might not be your own voice. That inner critic might be the voice of others. It might be criticism or judgments that have stuck with you and that play on a loop or that erupt at the wrong time. Maybe it's your fear of being found out, of being an imposter. Maybe it's just your concern that you're not normal, or I don't know what it might be, but whatever it is, here's your invitation to let it go. And having done that, take your hands and turn them over. Allow your palms to face upward. And this is a physical, embodied practice of openness, of being receptive to that which you need. And in this moment, you might want to ask God for what you need right now, for what you need to sense or to feel or to know. Maybe it's just to receive a felt sense of grace, or to receive a sense of your place in the interconnection of things. Maybe it's just to receive an assurance that what God desires for you is to bring the best out of you, to see you come alive to yourself. Maybe that's all you need to receive today. So if you take a moment to do that, and then once you're done, you can open your eyes, come back into the world. Thanks for tuning in.